So most people think sex is about pleasure. But what if it's actually about power and we've lost control of it?
Imagine a society where men are in godly control of their genital function and their physical function. Women are safe. There's no rape.
Dr. Harvey spent decades studying the human body, and what he found was something no one's talking about. A system so precise, so intentional, that it exposes the lie of randomness. He says conception begins with a flash of light.
And there does appear to be, we've noticed, microscopically, a tiny explosion of light that occurs with fertilization.
That the male body broadcasts arousal whether we want it to or not. And that when we detach sex from responsibility, we break everything.
So if you were going to destroy a culture, what would you do? You would get their men to be in a constant state of sexual arousal, and you would free them up from their consequences.
This episode will shake what you think you know about sex, about control, and the cost of ignoring the truth. Here we are. Welcome, Harvey, Dr. Harvey. Thanks so much for joining us, mate.
A real pleasure.
Yeah, well, we've had conversations over the years, or over the time we've known each other, which I have found absolutely fascinating. Topics have included the theology of the penis, theology of menstruation, theology of circumcision. I think I heard you talking about, and I just been gripped by what you've said about all these things, sort of explaining intelligent design into many of the things we just take for granted that the body does. Could you share some of those with us? This is so fascinating.
Thanks, PJ. Where do I start? Yeah. I think a bit of a background, because I didn't come out of this with no training. I did my medical degree in South Africa, and undergraduate one. I did biochemistry as well. And then went back to specialize to do obstetrics and gynecology. And so I've been a specialist for the last 27 years. I've just medically retired, but I've retained my fascination with all things obstetrics and gynecological, which obviously involve the science and the practice of reproduction, understanding men and women in their biological functions, and of course touching on a lot of their other functions. And in my practice, having to deal with when things go wrong, how we have to try and reverse them and get life and health out of them. So it's given me two ways of, one, diving deep into the science of reproduction. But I became a Christian when I was at university, when I was doing biochemistry, and largely based on the obviousness of design when looking into the depths of chemical and biochemical science. And it was a light bulb moment, and I became a Christian when looking at a picture of a complex enzyme, what all of us have and can't do without, in a cell. And it changed my entire perspective on not only seeing things from a chemical point of view, but macroscopically the body and the way we are made, and launching into the way we reproduce. So that's the background of some scientific credentialing in a way.
Yeah.
But given that, I got new eyes when I became born again and invited the Lord into my life to oversee what I was seeing and give me his perspective on them. Yeah. And that's been the fascination of my study while I've been going through the science of it. So there's a parallel interest in the hard science of ONG as the world looks at it secularly, but also in seeing its perspective from a Christian point of view.
It's so naturally embedded when you're dealing with beginnings of life. You can't, for me anyway, I've had the birth of my 3 daughters, and at each time something is going on. I don't know what's spiritual if that's not spiritual. And you think, how did this little thing get breath in its lungs, get life and, blood flowing through its veins? You're thinking, obviously, we played our part. We had sex. But I remember looking at my daughter's little finger. I thought, I don't even have a clue. I mean, I've studied, but I don't even have a clue how this thing got made. Just a little finger. How did that come to being? And, for me, it was so obvious. My daughter has a creator who knit her together. This wasn't an accident. Is there any standouts in theology that in biology, I should say, that you've just found wow, this is incredible. We've just discovered just a perfect case of intelligent design that you can think of?
Well, as I said, I go back to Pyruvate Dehydrogenase, which was the multi-unit enzyme with 6 different functions on the surfaces of mitochondria that convert a small 3-carbon chip of fuel into ATP, which runs our cells. It's our battery for our cells, every cell. And so none of us can have life without it. And that was a clincher for me, because to see it in its context, to see that every single component of that 48 subunit enzyme, and there are thousands of them on the mitochondria, has to have design for its function, but is meaningless without the rest of the components of the other pathways, both preceding it and following it, to produce ATP to keep a cell alive. Now, it's curious that in order to function, it needs to have its product around in order to work. It's like in order to build a Tesla, we have to have a Tesla to take parts from, to make parts in order to make the Tesla work. So the components of the cell are pre-programmed inside its genetics, and the unwrapping of that code are in an orderly manner, in just the right concentrations, in the right temperature, in the right pressure, in the right pH, and the right sodium and the right potassium ratio, in order simply to survive. That all has to be in place and working in order for the system to be observed working. There's no half measures that would get to them. There's no half cells that you can see with simple components to produce life. And I think there's a lot of study being done with that in the scientific world. So I think the universe screams design. I think the design probably comes from Deo Signe, which is the writing of God. So even in the word itself, it conveys the acknowledgement of a creator. It's like us looking at an artwork and not acknowledging the artist. Or it's us looking at a constructed thing and simply analyzing it, looking at it, and then insulting the artist by saying it made itself. So I think that was a big eye-opener for me. And nothing I have studied in looking at science has ever dissuaded me from that. I'm unconvinced by the competing hypotheses. They raise more questions than answers, and they are less intellectually and spiritually satisfying. So I think if you're going to pursue science till its ends, then do so. But keep your open mind that at the grand scheme of things, I think Robert Jastrow, the astronomer, came up with the expression that scientists have been looking for climbing the mountain to find the pinnacle of truth. And when they reach the summit, they might find that theologians are up there already.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Einstein, right? Did he say science without religion is lame? Obviously, he said religion without science is blind, but it was a...
Now, that's not to say a lot of people aren't very good scientists. Science is the collective observations of people and the conclusions they come to. And science changes because observations change and conclusions they come to change. So the science is not settled most of these very complex questions, such as the origin of life, abiogenesis, and so on. So that was particularly compelling for me when I did biochemistry, but it became more convincing as I did medicine, seeing what I'd learned biochemically now in action, in in labor ward, in pathology, in surgery,
Yeah.
in fluid management, in drugs. And so I think it's a fascinating area to see the fingerprints of God everywhere when we study through his eyes and be open to him speaking through his creation to us.
Yeah.
And I think Romans 1:20 says it's through his creation you'll see the qualities of God and his divine character and his nature.
So men are without
excuse. And one of the most compelling books I've read is by Professor of Informatics, Werner Gitt, who clearly lays out when you're looking for things to understand and the language to understand, he looks at informatics and he says it's inescapable to recognize design when we start looking at an intelligible world.
Hey, if you're loving this conversation, don't forget you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. Deep questions, honest answers, and just one email a month. You can sign up at lovequestionspodcast.com or the link is below. Fascinating. You've got to tell me or tell us more about, let's start with the theology of menstruation. I remember being so captivated by this thought, I don't want to steal your thunder here, but just around sacrifice being inbuilt into a woman's psyche, because once a month, 1 in every 4 days on average, they're in reproductive age, there's blood, which signifies sacrifice and making life about another, even at personal cost, which is such a beautiful thing. That's what my wife lives that out from day to day. Her life is sacrificial towards us and our family, and she delights in it. And she's never more beautiful than when she's laying down her life for us.
Absolutely right. And without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. And God enters into the world, into the humanity of the world, through the body of a woman, which is fascinating in itself, the theology of immaculate conception. And how did he provide a sperm at the time to mix with her egg, or did she have any genetic contribution? She would have to, given the transmission of mitochondria, which is a maternal alone function. But be that as it may, understanding the woman's menstrual cycle is fascinating. It's in awe. I was in awe of it, and while I was studying it, I wrote a psalm called a gynae psalm. If I can share some of it with you, just to give you an idea of what was going through my mind when I wrote it. It kind of paraphrases to some degree Psalm 139, which is, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I praise you, Lord, for women are fearfully and wonderfully made. Before the embryo is but a month old, you've already selected the genetic material for her offspring. You carefully orchestrate the formation of her body. You bring hollow tubes silently together to fuse and house a generation as yet unconceived. All this under the cover of brooding darkness. Your hands surround her dividing follicles, her nourishing filigree networks of tiny blood vessels, and she bathes in the warmth of her own waters, protected and sheltered in the firm and precious clasp of her mother. So skillfully you weave these filmy tissues that in the future she's continent at will. And so carefully you attend to the lining of her cavity for her own children one day. And your attention to detail astounds. While her fingers are hidden from her sight, you design them with the tiny puff of chemicals, just a fraction for a minute, which rise and fall through the day and night. And these prepare her for motherhood as she grows. You're a wise and careful architect of life, and you ordain it so, and in studying our very presence, we marvel at your creation. You're magnificent, and you're the origin of knowledge, and the very essence of scientific truth. How strange that men would seek to attribute this intricacy and this sort of mesmerizing clockwork detail to mere chance. This symphony of biochemistry, as if a watch had the audacity to say, where's the watchmaker? Is he around? Why, no, I just appeared spontaneously from the elements of the earth. I've no design or meaning. In everybody, but in a woman's as well, the thread-like channels convey messages from her supraoptic nuclei in the brain to her pituitary to orchestrate the rise and fall of hormones that are produced in the brain to cause the ovaries to stimulate and choose the eggs to be collected for each menstrual cycle, kind of like a conveyor belt. And so wave after wave are recruited for her cycles. We take advantage
in
of
utero, in an unborn baby.
No, that's all prepared. It all gets settled out. By the time the baby is 5 months old in utero, all the genetic material for her offspring is set aside.
Yeah.
She has about 5 million over. By the time she gets to birth, they go down to about 2 million. Some of them just disintegrate. And by the time she gets to puberty, there's about 40 to maybe 50,000. And a few hundred may be recruited in the microscopic stage, but only one gets to be presented to the sperm, almost like a bridal procession where you've got the bride and the attendants who are there to assist, but who fall away, but she becomes the focus. I see something tremendous in every single wedding as a physical demonstration of this amazing selectivity. And we're the bride of Christ. So how he grooms us to become that perfect, the bride where our focus is on the wedding, he replicates that to some degree in almost every menstrual cycle. There's a ovum that's recruited, it is stimulated, it develops, it's released to a suitor to impregnate and create new life. And there does appear to be, we've noticed, microscopically, a tiny explosion of light that occurs with fertilization. Now that might be, as the Catholic Church has said, at the time of ensoulment. Not quite sure. But when does that entity called life enter the components?
Can I just clarify? You're saying a burst of light in and around conception.
Light.
Wow. In the innermost part of the womb.
Suddenly comes out.
Sex has happened. The sperm's released. It's tracked its way to that egg that she's carried since she was in the womb. Correct. In that vesicle, ready to go at that time. That's right. And the two collide and there's light in there. My goodness. Oh my God. He's amazing. This is so amazing.
There's more.
Yeah. And
there's so much more.
But just the alternative, right? I think there's people out there and they just adhere to the worldview that this all just spontaneously happened through chance over a large amount of time. This was that idea you said, that just if you leave the materials for long enough and chance has its effect, then a wristwatch will be just suddenly, formed and come together.
Yeah.
It requires faith to think that.
Hoyle, who is the astrophysicist, said that the chance of life occurring spontaneously is like a whirlwind going through a junkyard producing a 747. That was at the time when 747s were probably the most complex flying objects around. But take it much further than that. If components all swirl together and somehow produce a person, they've not only got to do that, they must also produce the capacity to reproduce. Now, think that through and you'll see just how complex and difficult it is to imagine. Ask about DNA. We talk about Miller-Urey experiments of trying to form proteins with pressure and concentration of various early substances. They produce disfigured protein-like structures. They don't produce ordered ones, which we find in life. There are an enormous number of things in biochemistry which point to design. So I mean, that could be a whole talk on its own. But we're looking at reproduction, and it's just the miracle of reproduction.
Yeah.
And the eye gobsmacking design in it.
Yeah.
It's magnificent. And I've delivered, I think in my career, probably over 15,000 babies maybe. And I've never tired of delivering one in the middle of the night, getting up early in the night. I'm never tired of it. For me, it was the most dramatic and beautiful thing to see. And for me to be there to oversee the safe arrival of the next generation was a privilege as a man. That's beyond my imagination. And I'm so pleased. I mean, you can't be born again if you weren't born right the first time.
Exactly.
So.
It's so glorious. The earth gets filled with glory. I mean, I just love asking questions. We're here to ask, is there better questions to ask? And I think our culture has some narratives in it. And there's competing narratives. I don't think it's uniform, but there's some narratives that say, really among the sexes, there's not much difference. We really effectively we're interchangeable. Everyone's just about the same. Anything a guy can do, a girl can do. Anything a girl can do, a guy can do. And really it's something a doctor assigns at birth, and it's a socially constructed thing. But when I'm hearing you talk about the reproductive potential, ingrained in a little baby girl in the womb, you see just stark differences in biology, DNA. Obviously, I hadn't even thought of mitochondrial DNA as a uniquely maternal input. So tell us about the differences, why they're important. How do the two sexes, the two genders, complement each other, and where do you see design in that?
It's self-evident. We exist simply because our parents were complementary, and we were conceived. Two men, sadly, cannot conceive on their own. They have to have the introduction of a member of the opposite sex, and two women in the same way. So that's
not controversial.
That's simply a biological reality, and I don't want to offend anybody, but that's just reality. We're designed in such a way is that we gestate as human beings. There's no doubt about that. When we're born, it's evident that we are of one or the other gender, with very few exceptions, and there are some intersex folk. But that doesn't imply that there's a spectrum of reality of preference.
Kindergarten taught us this. Men.
We do know when the reproductive process goes wrong. And the theology behind that would be that's the effect of sin in the world when Adam fell, or creation fell with him. And as a result, we start to see disorder creep in. Now, is that mean that death is now entered into the realm that God has made? And is it programmed? We look at the telomeres at the end of various critical genes. We're looking at the immobilization of critical genes by methylation and demethylation, and the rate that those two occur may ultimately be affected. And then as a result, a cell's capacity to duplicate is disabled, and then ultimately it can't survive and it dies. And then in too many of them, the organism will die, and then the person will die.
Can I just translate for a second? Am I right to interpret this as lifespan is gradually decreasing? Would
Correct.
that be so? But biblically, we see that, right? We see up to 300-400 years in early parts of Genesis. Then it's limited to 120 years subsequent
after
to Noah.
Genesis, that's right, to Noah. And then afterwards, it was around about 70 years, 70. There does certainly appear to be that. Our observation of what is in this little sliver of time it gives us the right to try to extrapolate as to whether or not we are becoming more likely to be subject to DNA damage and have inbuilt errors, or that we started off, in fact, in a really good biochemical state, and it supported longevity. But then, as time went by, so the accumulation of mutations, which is in fact what we see.
This is the fall, right?
We see mutation rates, and it's thought that there are between 40 and 50 mutations per generation that are new, simply because of background radiation and various effects on cellular mutation, cancers and so on. Cancers look at the control of cell division, and if the control of cell division is lost because of whatever the reason may be, whether that be a vector-introduced thing like Burkitt's lymphoma or damage done by radiation or so on, then ultimately the cell's division control is lost, and then they start to proliferate with scant regard to surrounding neighbors, stealing their resources, sugar-driven because they are need the energy, and they begin to break beyond their bounds that are designated for them genetically, and become a tumor and metastasize. So, a thumbnail view of cancers sort of originate there with our understanding of oncology, and they will shorten life. But rather looking at the design side of it, we have the capacity to grow, to mature. We hit this fascinating time called puberty, when men start realizing, in fact, that their genitals are there for procreation. They might not know the full extent of why and how, but they are born into a culture usually which will teach them that. And if you fail to teach them that, then they will be taught other things. They might be taught that if you have sexual stimulation and you get an erection, then you're allowed to do so and so, and you can exploit the female women, people of your species, no matter what. Now that's got implications socially and in every culture.
That's not theoretical.
There's controls.
That's not theoretical, Harvey.
No.
The stats on pornography consumption in the West are so high. 9 in every 10 children is accessing pornography. So
4 out of 10 of pastors say they've got a problem with it. So that's rather. These are people who are morally who are guardians of moral tuition. So it gets us onto something like the theology of the penis, which I know we
have to give it to us.
About
you got to
because
tell us. It's so
everybody
interesting.
kind of wants to know it. I find it quite fascinating that the penis we don't speak very much about because it's kind of huddled in tones which are more sort of furtive and forbidden areas. Quite obviously, because men's sexual function depends on penile response. A man walking around without an erection, with testicles, just doing what he's doing, is not necessarily going to be any threat to anybody. But a man with an erection clearly will show to other members around that he is aroused and wishes to procreate. That's the message that comes. Now, that's not true necessarily, but that's a message that comes. So it is interesting biblically that God would call men under his covenant to wear a badge of his covenant with him on the penis, to take away a small piece of skin that's not necessary for reproduction. He can still procreate, but he has to handle it every single day to avoid, and is aware that by self-stimulation that he can obtain an erection. Who cares? Well, it's a brilliant design, as every man will happily testify. Me too. I've got 3 kids.
Amen.
Love my wife. She's really wonderful and a great advert for very healthy sexual life, myself and my wife. So we love it. So this is the context
Hallelujah.
in which I'm 68. So still going, which is great.
Go Harvey.
And I often say to Kath, it's better than before.
Yeah.
I always thought before I was going to get married that it's basically you start with getting married and it all downhill from there.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. So the whole theology of sexual function is so sacred that it is encased culturally in expectations of society for a couple to come together because of the fruits of sexual function are new children. And they need to be reared, they need to be looked after, they need to be grown into the future of the culture, of that society, of all men, of all cultures, every single one. If we other people and just say, well, not them, not us, just us, then we deny their human being status. There's only one race in this world. There's only one. It's called the human race. So racism shouldn't actually technically exist. But he's couched the sexual function with laws and with expectations that will provide for optimal functioning. And if we stray outside those boundaries, we will produce pathology in ourselves and in the society we have.
Can I just jump in there with just, we want to take a look at what culture says about what you're saying, and it's just worth reflecting on the viewpoints and asking questions. So you see, and I see, I agree with you. I think it's just self-evident. You see that a man has got to have dominion over his penis in the sense that he has extraordinary creative power, the power to, this is what you told me. It struck me so much I couldn't forget it, that he has the potential to court a woman, to attract her. Then he has the potential to arouse her. Then he has the potential to copulate. And then he has the potential through intercourse to procreate. That is extraordinary creative power. That the capacity to create life. But all the way along, you and I believe this to be true, all the way along, almost every one of those observations is challenged in culture, is challenged in cultural practice.
That's right.
No, sex is not for procreation. Sex is for something else.
They dislocate it from its natural function.
Yeah, it's dissociation.
And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And largely, I think the wisdom of God was to ensure that the sexual experience would be intensely pleasurable for both members, to celebrate the life that would naturally come forth from it.
Yeah.
So it has theological significance. God attaches the most exquisite pleasure to ejaculation, orgasm for men. Interestingly enough, women don't have to have an orgasm to conceive, but for men it's obligatory. You're unable to, unless you have artificial intervention and have testicular aspiration. But by and large, it's the intense pleasurability of sexual function that is the attraction. I've noticed in the Garden of Eden, the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was what? It was attractive to the eye, it was good for getting wisdom, and it would make you like God. And this is like the visible hanging fruit, which if you do not acknowledge God's control or responsibility that he confers on you, you're going to run into trouble.
Right, just those
so
points.
That's why I said the badge of a covenant with God is worn by the man on his penis, so that he is constantly reminded of his obligation to ride this wild horse. Fascinating studies that were done in 1984, I think. There's another one done in 2022. It's published in the Journal I think it's a psychology journal, one of the psychology journals by Doyen et al. And it looked at moral choice making when men were aroused and when they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And found that when they were not aroused, they were more rational, they were more concerned about general well-being and health of the others around them, and the women they were with when they were not aroused. When they were aroused, they were subject to the same questions and same the same moral choices were presented before them. And there was a significant difference.
Yeah.
They became more self-centered. They became more personal conquest focused. They became more exploitative.
Wow.
So if you were going to destroy a culture, what would you do?
Constant state of arousal.
You would get their men to be in a constant state of sexual arousal, and you would free them up from their consequences.
Yeah.
So you would talk about condoms and birth control and tell women don't worry about it. We can destroy the evidence of the natural consequence of the intercourse, but just have more sex. And we in the West now become a sex-saturated culture. We don't have any theology around self-control because we are our own God.
Yeah.
It's more self in control as opposed to self to be controlled.
Well, that's what I loved when we spoke about this previously. You said, what a test from the Lord. You're given this enormous power, remembering, of course, the background to Christian faith and belief is that this world is over really quick. It's just a blip, and then we'll be in eternity. And how we reigned and we ruled here, the way that we led and ruled here will dictate how we will reign and rule forever and ever in the new heaven, the new Jerusalem, the new earth. And this is a test for a man. Will you be, when given this power, the power of the penis, you could call it, what will you do when you're given this power? Will you yield yourself to your Creator, obey your commanding officer, and use it as instructed for the blessing and benefit and procreation and ultimately blessing of not only your family but those around you? Or will you use it to damage anyone and anyone who gets in your way for self-gratification? I mean, what a test. And now the test is harder to pass because of the stimulation.
Imagine a society where the young men are schooled and educated in the responsibility that they have to use their whole body, of which their penis is a part, but that's the part that that's regarded as their strength.
Yeah.
The scriptures talk about what's in your loins is your strength, with testicles. They will produce testosterone. It's not just that. Your SRY gene, which gets unwrapped, dictates the muscular growth in a man's body, the structure of his pelvis and his bones, and so on. So he is likely to be conferred as the person with more physical strength. So he can overpower women. Now imagine a society where men are in godly control of their genital function and their physical function. Women are safe.
Imagine how safe
There's no
women
rape.
feel. Yeah.
There's no ectopic pregnancies because of sexually transmitted diseases. There's no incest. There's no marital rape. There's no painful intercourse because men are restrained because of the love they have for their women. Women feel that they can walk around society without fear of being exploited because they are beautiful. If we look at the complete opposite to that, we have a look at some of the Islamic cultures who enshroud their women because the theology is that the woman's attractive power is too strong for men to resist. And therefore, they must be wrapped up. Not the men. They don't have to have self-control. They will blame the woman for exercising too much temptation.
But in the Bible, Adam and Eve both participated. Eve took the fruit first, but who gets the bad rap? Forevermore. Adam,
you took responsibility for it. You took responsibility for it.
I got to stop, Harvey. This is I'm around young people all the time.
Okay.
what
How
an
about
object
this?
lesson
What about
for
guys?
self-control.
Yeah, you look at Daniel. He was in captivity, and in a way, Martin Iles says we're in Babylon.
Yeah.
So how are we
Living
going
under
to
empire.
how are we going to live in a foreign empire which has foreign gods, foreign goals, foreign philosophies, foreign history, foreign customs, and yet we need to be true to the God who has rescued us out of oblivion? How are we going to live? How are we going to exercise our choices? How are we going to warm to how are we going to respond to the sensory triggers that will cause naturally erections? And then we're going to be flooded with images that will cause sexual arousal. What do we do with them?
Yeah.
Jesus was tempted in every way like any of us.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. If his body was normal, he may have had arousal too. But being God in human flesh, he had ultimate control over it and recognized what was in the future and what would have to be sacrificed. His sexuality was sacrificed because of a greater goal in the end, and that's an eternity with us. That's his love for us. So he restrained himself, ultimately not having a relationship with a woman.
Yeah.
And he was the most winsome and attractive man because of this power.
Yes.
You remember the Twilight series? Do you remember them?
Yeah, Edward.
Remember Edward? Every woman wants a boyfriend like Edward.
Yeah.
Why? Stephanie Gray, who is a Mormon, she really put her finger on this. She created a system whereby Edward had supernatural power to protect his object of his desire, but had ultimate restraint in not allowing that desire to overwhelm her and overcome her. So he could have, with his powers, exploited her in her vulnerability, but he didn't. He laid down his life. And all the women fell for it.
Yeah.
They absolutely said everybody wants to be like, what's his name, Patterson.
Yeah.
Everybody wants a boyfriend like.
Then he did Batman, and everyone changed their mind.
No. But she struck on something.
Yeah.
And it was a runaway success.
Yeah.
Because in what's coming through now, I think, in the younger generation of women who haven't been schooled in Christian thought or Christian worldview, but they intrinsically recognize there's something very attractive about a man whose power is under control.
Yeah, that's right. This is what grips me, the benefits for the individual. I mean, there's even studies on semen retention, the neurobiological effects of retaining semen and not ejaculating at will. And there's actually non-Christian folks out there buying into this and seeing its benefit. But you're right, the attractiveness of being a powerful man who restrains power for the sake of his own virtue or for a higher cause, and ultimately for the protection and even the gift. Think about this for a young lady.
Selecting the woman of his choice and
Here's
he
the
lay
gift.
himself down for her.
Their wedding day.
That is intoxicating for women. Doesn't matter where they come from. They're all in awe of a man in control of his sexual urges.
And I did all of this, darling, so we could get to our wedding day, so you and only you and nobody else, you get this. I went through this so I could give you all of me. It's so beautiful. You want to weep.
Oh, that lovely song that came out, all of me to all of you. And these are the things that stir on the heartstrings. Now, if you wanted to spoil a culture, how would you do it? You go straight for the ongoing and persistent temptation to try and break that man down and make him a servant of his appetites and respond to his sexual urges like it's just part of something over which he has no control. And that will dismantle the true manhood in a culture, and they will be beaten without a shot. You could walk in and take them over.
Do you remember, this is biblical, remember in Numbers, Balaam and Balak, so he couldn't curse Israel, But what did he do? We read later in Peter and in Revelation, what's he come and do? Well, he convinces the Midianite women to come into the camp and lead the Israelites into sexual immorality. He couldn't beat them from the mountaintop, but he led them into sexual immorality and got them one way or another. He got them.
Well, look at what the devil did. He got the strongest man in Israel, Samson and Delilah, and nailed him. How?
Yeah.
Sexual immorality, falling in it. Managed to get him because he'd become a servant to his sexual desires. David, probably the most successful leader and commander, and he ends up succumbing to his sexual desires because he's not out doing what he's supposed to be doing, leading his army. He's wandering around the rooftop hoping to get a glimpse of someone else's beautiful body.
That's right.
And he couldn't, and he gets desire, and he recognizes, just like Cain, it's crouching at the foot of your door.
Yeah.
You must have command over it or it'll destroy you.
Yes.
It hasn't ever been any different.
Diana?
And then the wisest man in the world, Solomon, gets 700. I mean, how can you impregnate or have time to go through 700 wives and 300 concubines? He was a slave to his sexual desires, despite all that God had given him, including wisdom.
Yeah.
What price?
Yeah.
Giving someone of that amount of influence, wisdom, and then watching him fall.
Yeah.
Look at the NBA, people who have paid millions and millions of dollars. They might have 35 to 40 kids, women all over the place, all being supported as an indication of his prowess.
Yeah.
What a sad and distorted picture when you compare that with what God calls us to celebrated, controlled sexuality.
Yeah.
And then once you do it right, you will never, ever regret it. I mean, I'm so grateful that I had intercourse for the first time with my wife on our wedding night and have never had intercourse with another woman before or after her.
Yeah.
That's it. No, I'm not saying. But when you do it right,
I was sexually active.
You're going to have a blessing that follows that.
Totally.
Now, you can be
just
restored
for people, Harvey,
and so on.
I'll just say just real quick for people who that wasn't their experience too. I was sexually active before I got married and came to Jesus radically, born again, maybe 13 years ago, something like that. And I grieve that I couldn't give my wife that. There's restoration, there's healing
absolutely.
And all that.
That's redemption.
But it doesn't change the beautiful picture that he created.
No. And I think we should strive for the ideal and hold it as an ideal. I think what happens is that the world recognizes it might be too hard, so it lowers the bar and makes it easier for people to feel better about what is expected. The trouble with doing that is that you diminish the picture of Jesus' control over his life. And it's a difficult situation for folk who are asexual or have bisexual or homosexual urges as well. One understands that these urges are there, but they are to be controlled, and we have Jesus to look to as our example. And there's a complementarity about it. So to get back to the theology of the penis is that you will constantly be reminded of your obligation before God about how you dress yourself, how you will use your body, how you will respond to your natural triggers that will give you erections and what you do with them, your moral fragility and vulnerability when you are sexually aroused. And if you can be aware of that and preempt it, then you are able not to sin in it. And then what's the role of women in this? Because one's got to ask, well, do they have any role at all in this? Man's supposed to be responsible. Yeah, but have a look at what even Solomon's wisdom said in Proverbs. A young man, he saw him go into the city. He meets a woman dressed as a prostitute. Do tell us, how and why would a woman dress as a prostitute? How would you know? What is she showing? What's her purpose? And that is to arouse the lusts in a man and ensnare him. And Solomon says, don't go down that route. You're like going into like a bird darting into a snare, an arrow to the liver. You will punish yourself if you deviate from God's dictated management of your own sexuality.
Yeah.
It's one sin you've got to run from. Don't sit there and bargain with it, because when you get aroused, your bargaining power is lessened.
Yeah.
And you are to flee.
Yeah.
Joseph and Potiphar's wife, run.
Flee.
Why did you go there? You knew that there was a temptation, but you were a young, good-looking, strapping young man, and his wife, Potiphar's wife, desired him.
Yeah.
So how do we educate our young men in our culture to guard their sexuality and to use it to godly ends? Because it, like a hand, your hand can become a fist to punch, or it can become a hand to do surgery to save lives. Yeah. You choose. You're in charge of what your hands do.
Yeah.
And it's your job and it's your responsibility to oversee the function of your body, and for which you will be held accountable. Yeah. I think we should, as a church, we've got the most powerful polemic, the most powerful narrative to educate men on godly sexuality.
Yeah.
All the other cultures try the same. Every culture attempts to shield the penis in some way, even in places like Papua New Guinea and so on, where the men don't have any clothes. In Africa, anywhere, they will protect to some degree a man's strength. And leads us to, why are we clothed? That'd be a helpful thing to consider. Why did God dress us in our nakedness? Why would that be? Did he know that this would be our Achilles heel? Did he not know that this would be the thing that would bring us down? This is what will cripple men. And it only took 7 or 8 generations before you had to basically remove all life from earth, because it had every inclination of their mind was towards sin. Yeah. And even when Noah escapes it, and I'm going to Armenia in 2 weeks' time to a walking tour, and from where you can see Ararat, when that his 3 sons and their wives came out, sexual sin wasn't too far away either, because Ham did something with debates about exactly what, but Noah's nakedness could have been either him naked or his wife naked. Yeah. And if Ham went in and abused her while they were drunk, and she conceived Canaan, I don't know, it's possible, but it would have been his son. He'd had 3 other sons prior to that. And the fruit of that sin was cursed, Canaan. So we see, sadly, that even although Noah and his family were saved from the previous earth that was soaked with evil, you could get them out of the earth soaked with evil, but you couldn't get that earth out of them.
Let's move into 2025 and take a look at culture. The first thing that startles me as we're hearing this talk about the covering of the penis and the implied nakedness and all that is, or the nakedness there. 21st century Western culture right now, in any other culture, would have been considered people dressing as prostitutes, like undeniably. What people wear nowadays as normal, as active wear, as whatever else, in previous cultures just would have been pornographic. It's just everywhere. So there's narratives in culture. People are thinking a certain way. Some of those narratives, I could get this wrong, but here's what I think. This is liberty. This is what freedom looks like. This is personal self-expression. This is liberation from all maybe the patriarchal kind of rules and regulations. This is freedom to just expose whatever, sleep with whoever, be whoever I want. Maybe my question to that would be, well, is it working? Are people who are on Tinder having a great time? Are people, I'm sure momentarily that's true, but is it working in the long run? Is it working 5 years down the road? Are people just deeply content with their dating life? Multiple partners then settle down. Are marriages lasting? Are children happy? Is it working would be my question. And maybe is there a question underneath that, Harvey? What's the better question that maybe culture could be asking? You know, we don't want to point out what's lost. Let's point out, is there a different way of looking at this that could help?
Yeah, you ask all the right questions. What is likely to be most long-lasting in this life of mine? What is the legacy I would like to leave as a man or as a woman in this world? The deeper questions as to why do I exist? Why am I here? Why am I made the way I am? Those questions have plagued philosophers and thinkers in every culture, in every time.
But theologians know?
But theologians have an answer.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to be able to articulate that answer. We can use science and study to prove that a godly perspective and a godly control and a life lived in service of God's direction will produce life and produce longevity. We'll do that.
Didn't Richard Dawkins, I believe, just came out and said that he's a cultural Christian. I mean, this world-renowned atheist. I don't think he believes in Christ, but in terms of what's good for culture, Christianity.
He said he's a cultural Christian. He doesn't believe any of the detail of it, but somehow it works. So he'd prefer to be in a situation
Wonder how
because
it works.
it's a bulwark that protects him against something worse.
Yeah.
When the country he lives in, if it has Sharia law, he would find himself criticizing them and have a one-way ticket to getting a blasphemy charge.
Yeah.
So he culturally acknowledges that the Christian worldview and the biblical worldview, Christians are very broad, but the biblical worldview certainly confers stability and confers rationality
and liberty.
And liberty. You are free within these boundaries. You're not free to do whatever you like. Try that if you jump off a building and you think you're free to fly.
Yeah.
There will be inescapable consequences for your decisions, for which your freedom to decide will limit all freedoms in the future.
Yeah.
So how does one navigate through that that sort of maze of choices?
Yeah, I just want to talk on that one for a second because it's so fascinating and kind of startling. You know, we're on the cusp of things like anti-vilification. Well, we passed the anti-vilification laws, but now we're entering into like what are the hate speech laws going to look like in Australia? Okay, on first principles, that sounds really good. Make sure people aren't doing hateful or harmful things that damage others. Pause. Who gets to decide that? It sounds wonderful in theory, but who's the arbiter of what is hateful and what is not hateful, what is true and what is untrue? Ultimately, what you land on is someone has to be God. Someone has to be the arbiter of right and wrong, because there is a line. Most people say, well, we don't want a line. We don't want to judge. It's self-determination. You're free to be you. Well, actually, what we're seeing now in the law is we don't want God to tell us we're free to be this and not this. But we're going to have somebody. And who is that somebody? Is it secular humanism? Is
it Mother Teresa or is it Hitler? Exactly. So who is the arbiter? Who is, if we're looking at humanistic thought, who is going to be the final arbiter of right and wrong? And that's the fundamental question we should be asking. When people bring up all of these questions about, I think this is an okay behavior, that's all right. First question, on what basis do you decide what's right or wrong and why? And you're going to have one of three answers.
Do no harm. Do no harm to people. We just want to be a good guy.
Well, what's harm? So, is it harm immediately or is it harm down the track? That's long-term. Delayed gratification has benefits. But if you, have your sugar hit now, you're establishing an appetite for later, which you won't be able to get up and make it more difficult to actually fight with. So, yes, your immediate gratification might give you pleasure here, but like rape, which if you don't have a godly dictate that it is wrong, you might say, well, I had an erection, I had to do something with it. So she was the object of my desire.
We see this.
And that was right for me.
Well, this is playing out
so
right
she says,
now.
well, no, it's not right for me. Well, no, I'm more powerful than you. So I think it was either either the fist or the phallus.
Yeah.
That's what Aldous Huxley said, or Bertrand Russell. He was the one that said, it's either the fist or the phallus. You're going to be in charge, and you've got more power, and you're going to lord it over those beneath you. And it's exactly what Jesus said.
Yeah.
In the world, you'll have power, and you'll lord it over those beneath you. But I tell you, I came to be a servant to all, and you must be a servant to all.
Yeah.
Subjugate your desires, subjugate your appetites, have them under control. Yeah. And if you don't think you've got the power to do them, ask me, and I will give you the power to overcome them.
Yeah.
And if you do fall, I will forgive you because I have laid down my life for you. There is that provision. Yeah. And so we don't just have an impossible standard for everybody to reach, and then they're doomed because they don't reach it.
He helps.
We have a savior.
Yeah.
And we have a theology that says one has restrained his infinite power. That's what Jesus had, infinite power. He spoke the world into being. He created the universe with the word, power of his word. Do you think he couldn't sort out the person who's hammering nails through his wrist to stop? He could have just dissolved him. There's power under restraint for a better end. So we have not only an example, and I'm going to Turin, by the way. You know the Shroud of Turin. It's a burial cloth of Jesus. Yeah. Many think it is a burial cloth of Jesus. A lot of controversy about it. But if there was a selfie that God took to remind us physically of the extent of what had to be suffered to rescue us. That alone is a gospel in itself. It's a silent witness. Look at what he had to go through. And why did he have to go through it? It's because deviation from his plan has resulted in so much pain, so much destruction, and so much death. It would require a divine solution. He lays down his life.
Yes.
He follows his own law to the letter. He lives the perfect life. And he said, I will leave captives in my train. And that's you and I. And everybody else is listening.
and amen. And just the beauty of Jesus, the beauty of self-sacrifice, the beauty of all my life poured out that you might live. I just want to again contrast that against the questions maybe being asked in society now that I just think they're fascinating and very challenging for some, I think. So here we are. You've got this LGBT spectrum, but at the fringes of the spectrum, things get really interesting. I mean, within the spectrum, things get kind of interesting. L, G, and B, many of whom were established in the 1980s gay rights movements. It was very important to say, born this way and can never change. Now, T and Q are coming along, are saying there's no such thing as born this way.
Gender fluid,
sexuality fluid, everything's fluid. It's not just fluid throughout your lifespan, it's fluid in the moment. So I can have a penis, but I can be a woman in this moment, and maybe the L parts of that alphabet soup are saying no, and all of that. But at the fringes as well are there's aromantic people as a categorization. People who aren't romantic, I'm like, well, I can think of a lot of Aussie blokes in that category. Asexual, of course, but the fascinating one for me is the minor attracted person. I don't know if it fits in the LGBT thing, I don't know, but definitely it's an emerging idea. Someone who is saying, well, my physical attractions are towards children. This is who I am. I think anthropologically this is huge. Because I think most people would say, well, you might feel that, but that's not okay to live that out. Some degree of restraint is required. You're not at fault for having that experience, but you're at fault if you act on that experience because it's just not right. I think Middle Australia, I think most people would say pedophilia is just, it's not right. You could probably say the same about incest, which then it does pull a big brick out of that wall, which says the most important thing is for me to discover who I really am on the inside. Well, hold on a second. If you discover on the inside that you're finding yourself attracted to a child, you ought to question that and exercise restraint and live within a social standard. I think most I think most people within the LGBT community would probably agree with that. No, actually, there is a standard. If there is a standard for sexually acceptable behavior, I think what most people would do, heterosexual, whatever, what most people would do who aren't yielded to an almighty, all-powerful God would say, well, the standard is just on the other side of what I'm doing. That's what everyone wants, right? Everyone wants to say, I think these pedophiles belong in jail, but what I'm doing is okay. I'm just, you pick where you pick on that spectrum. I'm just watching porn, but you know, I'm not a rapist, or I'm just sleeping around, but you know, it's not serious. It's always consensual. Or then I'm just in this letter in the alphabet, but it's not, you know, everyone is saying, yeah, we agree there's a standard, but I'm okay within my part of the standard. Well, that's humans becoming God. We believe God sets the standard for our benefit.
There's your three types of who's in control, who's your authority. It's either autonomous, auto, nomos. The law is yourself. Heteronymous, a group of other people will decide what the law is and we'll impose it on you. Or theonomous, God outside his creation has dictated the law and he expects everyone to live by it. Now, there are ungodly theonomous ones. You know, various gods may decree this, that, or the other. So God says it. There's a group of priests to interpret it. So effectively, it's heterotheonomous. But in the Western culture now, particularly in Australia, if you'd ask people who decides what's right and wrong, because that's the question that will decide one of those three things. And if someone says, well, because God says, which God? Where is he written it? What language? Who interprets it? If it's heteronymous, which group of people are you listening to? And if it's autonomous, you do what's best for you. Now, it's funny that many folk who are adherents to a sexuality that's part of non-heterosexual group, and I'm talking about heterosexuals too, because some people are strongly heterosexual. In fact, they're the greatest group of people who have got deviant sexuality than the other groups. By far the greatest group. Divorce levels, you know, sleeping around.
Pornography consumption.
Mostly is among heterosexuals.
It's true.
So they're not off the hook. They're the largest group of deviants.
And unfortunately have done damage by isolating groups.
So I don't think it's fair that we single out people who've got same-sex attraction or kid attraction. All of it requires the governance of Jesus. All of it. And how he dictates, if you're born with those proclivities, then that's your burden. You carry it. There are some people who are born with heterosexual gigoloism and who can't stop looking at somebody else's wife. What do you tell them? Oh, that's normal for you, but the pedophile is much worse. So one's got to be careful about demonizing one group of people at the expense of others, and be fair to everyone. To say sexual deviation is common to all of us. Were it not that we were redeemed. So God's none of us is without excuse.
God's standard is uniformly applied to all of us.
Exactly. You might have done well with keeping yourself a virgin until you got married, but what was your thought life like beforehand?
Totally.
If you put a TV up on your head and watched what was on that TV in terms of your thoughts while you were walking down the beach, and were you ravishing the other's daughters there ahead of you, or somebody else's wife? That's Jesus said, if you thought about it, then you have demonstrated to me why I've got to come and do it right. So how do we deal with that temptation? So I think that's the really important thing. We've got to address the issue of all of us have sinned. All of us have a sexuality that needs redemption. Heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pediatric, MAP, or minor attracted persons. Bestiality. That all happened. It's all happened in the past. If you've ever been to Caesarea Philippi, you will see the shrines they had to Pan and to the various other gods. And that's where Jesus said, who do you say I am? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God, is what Peter said. And he said, blessed are you, Simon and Bar-Jonah, because it's been revealed to you by my Father in heaven. You see that I have the authority over all of this. None of these gods exist
Yeah.
This is just an opportunity to sanctify the behavior and the use of their appetites to their extremes.
Yeah.
That's all it was there to do.
Yeah.
So I set a new standard and I established myself as authority, and you recognize it.
Yeah.
So we must be fearless in the church to proclaim a God whose law extends to all of creation, all of it, every single one. The culture, doesn't matter what culture you come from, doesn't matter what persuasion you came from, doesn't matter where you were brought up in such and such a religious upbringing. It doesn't matter. You're made in the image of God. You will be held accountable for your decision making. Now that you have heard the gospel, you're going to need to respond to it. Lots of theological things that will follow on with that. But when it comes to sexuality and the way you are to behave, here's the prescribed standard. This is what he expects of us. And none of us have reached it. None of us have reached it. So we need a savior.
That's right. Who makes a way.
That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the all of us bit, because, imagine I'm a heterosexual man. Have I experienced and participated in lust? Do I have to take thoughts captive? Of course. How strange would it be if I said, well, who I am is I'm a cheater, because I look at other girls. I'm a cheater. It's my ingrained being. It's my identity. It's actually who I am.
It's not my fault. I'm made this way, born this way.
Christians are called to something so different, which is to say I may have been born into that, but I got born again of the imperishable seed. I became one of his. And by his power working within me, I overcome. In Revelation, right? To those who overcome, I'll not blot your names out of that book. To those who overcome, there is an expectation that, empowered by God's grace, through his power, we're not able, we're not capable, but through him living his life through us, we are able to live in a standard which not only is good for us, but it blesses, loves, encourages, supports, and nurtures people in our world.
In our world, you will have a stable society. Women will feel safe. Kids will feel protected. Kids will be instructed in godly sexuality so they don't weaponize it. Women will not be exploited. They'll be allowed to roam freely without being molested. Tell me what society wouldn't benefit from godly sexuality.
Yeah, that's right. Harvey, this has been so beautiful. I feel like we could talk all day, and probably will. I think we'll definitely come back and have further conversations. But one last thought, one question for you. What is the best question? What is the better question? What's the best question somebody who maybe isn't a follower of Jesus yet, but there's time now, you could become one, but what's the best question they could ask themselves? What's the better question than, who determines right from wrong? I think that's a great question.
That's the first one, because it establishes the authority by which the individual says what they're about to say.
Yeah.
And if it's just them, then the next question is, well, do you expect others to have the same autonomy that you confer upon yourself? And the obvious answer would have to be yes. So it's okay for me to steal your stuff. Well, no, okay. So it becomes the fist or the phallus then, because there's no higher authority telling you how you must live. Therefore, each individual will decide for themselves. They will use the gifts and cunning and abilities they have in order to lord it over those beneath them, and they will come and possess and steal your women and rape you, and so on and so on. If you become the final law. So if there's a lawgiver who has made us all in his image, we're all on the same level playing field. That makes it easy.
Yeah.
Much easier. If not, it's survival of the fittest, most angry, most sexually charged, most most exploitative. Yeah. That's where we are.
Well, we had heteronomic sort of institutions in 1929 in Germany, and look how that went.
Yes. So no. It doesn't mean that heteronormativity is necessarily godly. It has driven ungodliness and mayhem throughout history. So we've got to learn a bitter lesson of heteronormativity out of God's control. And then we have to acknowledge that we are weak in that area, and we have a standard, and we can continue to uphold that standard and aspire to it, because we do abandon it at our peril.
Yeah. Harvey, this has been so fascinating. Bless you. Thanks so much, mate.